friends, Father Kerry here, and this is another Holy Spirit moment. This one offering as a gift to you 5 wonderful Christmas stories that you may never have heard of. We have all heard of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol and O. Henry's short story, The Gift of the Magi. I bow to no one in my love of these 2 stories. I read them every Christmas. Christmas Carol was published in 1843, and we've had The Gift of the Magi since 1905. But because they are so well known and so well beloved, I'm not going to talk about them here. Instead, I would like to offer you short summaries and invitations to read for yourself of 5 additional stories. And the first one I would like to share with you is by the American author Washington Irving. It comes from his larger book, The Sketchbook, which contains short stories, many of which you already know, I'm sure, such as The Legend of Sleepy Hollow or The Legend of Rip Van Winkle. Now, in The Sketchbook, Washington Irving offers us 5 different Christmas stories. They are set in England at an estate called Bracebridge Estate, and they are narrated by an American who happens to be visiting in England. Charles Dickens visited the United States when he was still a young man, and he met Washington Irving, and he knew the Bracebridge stories well. And there is clear evidence that he was influenced by them, because a great deal of what later shows up in his story, A Christmas Carol, can be found in these Bracebridge Christmas stories by Washington Irving. The whole mood of the stories is set by a wonderful poem that Irving offers us at one point. It goes like this. Now Christmas is come, let us beat up the drum and call all our neighbors together. And when they appear, let us make such a cheer as will keep out the wind and the weather. These 5 stories feature caroling, feature reveling, feature a wonderful Christmas party with some of the most fantastic characters you can imagine. There is the squire, the old squire, who reminds me a great deal, as a matter of fact, of Mr. Fizzywig in The Christmas Carol. He is the host of the festivities, and you have never met a jollier man than the old squire. Or there is Master Simon, a rather aged and cadaverous bachelor who is an incredible flirt with all of the ladies at the parties. He also fancies himself a musician and tries to direct a roaring chorus of Christmas carols at the party at Bracebridge, which turns out to be quite disastrous. But everyone is having so much fun. Everyone is so in the spirit of Christmas that no one cares. The Bracebridge Christmas stories, all 5 of them, in Washington Irving's Sketchbook, which first appeared in 1819, are well worth your consideration. They are absolutely wonderful stories. The next story that I would like to recommend to you was written by the American author Willa Cather. She published it in 1896 in a newspaper, in a magazine rather. And she published it under a pseudonym, Elizabeth L. Seymour, which I understand, interestingly enough, is the name of one of Cather's cousins. The story is entitled A Burglar's Christmas. It features a young man who is down and out on his luck on Christmas Eve in the snowy and frigid streets of Chicago. He has failed in everything that he has ever tried to do. He left home a few years ago and has never been back since. And finally, in desperation, because he is so famished and cold, he decides that he will rob a rich household in order to at least find some trinkets that he can sell. There is a new house that is freshly built. He wanders into it. He goes upstairs. He starts filling his pockets with the jewelry that he finds when suddenly the door opens, and lo and behold, it is his mother, who he has not seen in years. There is a heartfelt perhaps a little sentimental, a little lachrymose scene in which the mother and the son reconcile with one another. At the end, the son asks the mother for pardon and forgiveness, and she beautifully, beautifully says this to him. She says, love has nothing to do with pardon or forgiveness. It only loves and loves and loves. This is a perfect sentiment to remember at Christmas. But it's also important, it seems to me, in reading this story, to recognize that this young man is every person who is down on their luck. Interestingly enough, at the very beginning of the story, he tells a companion of his that he no longer remembers what his name is. He's used so many of them in his years on the road. It seems to me that what Cather is trying to suggest there is that this young, no-named man can stand in for any number of men and women whom we ought to remember during this season, who we ought to show compassion to, because love only loves and loves and loves. The next story is by G.K. Chesterton, the British author. I have to tell you, I often have little patience for Chesterton because he just seems to me at times to be so wordy, as if he is writing to be paid by the word. But in this particular short story, which he published in 1906 in a London newspaper, I believe he is at his best. It is called The Shop of Ghosts. The story is this. The narrator, presumably Chesterton himself, is walking down a snowy street in London at Christmas time, and he happens to see an old curiosity shop. And he stares in the window, and he sees all kinds of toys in the shop window. Many of them are dingy and look like they've been there for a while, but they are all toys. He goes into the store and he decides he will buy a toy train for a nephew of his, and the shopkeeper is an old, aged man with a long, rather disheveled beard who looks extremely tired and even sickly. And when Chesterton, or the narrator, tries to pay the shopkeeper for the train, the shopkeeper says, "No, I've never taken money and I never will." And suddenly he recognizes, the narrator does, that this is Father Christmas himself. And he says to him, "But why do you look so old? Why do you look so ill?" And Father Christmas says, "Because I'm dying." And why am I dying? This is what he tells the narrator. "People object to me on such curious and inconsistent sorts of grounds. They say that I give people superstition and make them too visionary. But they say my heavenly parts are too heavenly. They also say that my earthly parts are too earthly. How can heavenly things be too heavenly? Or earthly things be too earthly? How can one be too good or too jolly? I don't understand." What Father Christmas is saying is that the skeptics, and in fact even the scorners of Christmas, believe that it's a mishmash. On the one hand, it's too heavenly, it's too spiritual. It brings in the Christ child, it brings in the incarnation. And on the other hand, it's too materialistic because it's all about giving presents, and people show their innate greed during Christmas time. Father Christmas says, I don't understand what they want from me, but they seem to be moving further and further and further away from me as the centuries roll on. At which point, several figures from the past magically enter the shop. Ben Jonson, the playwright, Robin Hood, Charles Dickens himself, Robert Steele of the Spectator papers. And suddenly they all realize that they believe in Father Christmas to such an extent that Father Christmas will never die, because there will always be some people who believe in him. As Charles Dickens proclaims at the end of the short story, Father Christmas will never die. There will always remain with us a spirit of joy and of celebration that is signaled by Christmas. The next short story that I would like to share with you and invite you to read for yourselves is one that was written in 1952. For my money, it is the most beautiful of all of the stories that I want to share with you today. It's Dylan Thomas's, the Welsh poet's Dylan Thomas's story, A Child's Christmas in Wales. This is one of the loveliest things imaginable. We have a narrator speaking to a child about Christmases long ago. And yet at the same time, the Christmas that the narrator is speaking about is also present. There's a lot of snow, and the snow creates an aura of silence and mystery. But there's a lot of gaiety and jolliness as well. Some of the characters that Dylan Thomas, the narrator, shares with us are just hilarious. There's Mrs. Prothero, for example, whose kitchen catches on fire, and she's rushing around frantically screaming for firemen to come and put the fire out. And when they do, she stands looking around at the kitchen, which really hasn't been harmed. And her maiden sister, Miss Prothero, comes down, and she sees the firemen standing around, exhausted from all of their work, and she says to them, and Dylan Thomas says she always knows the right thing to say, "Would you like something to read?" Or there are famous snowball fights between Dylan Thomas, the lad, and his fellow boys. Or there are the uncles who, after a big Christmas meal, sit back and smoke cigars and burp and fall asleep. Or there is Aunt Hannah, who takes just a little bit of rum on this Christmas day because it's only once a year. And at the end of this beautiful, beautiful prose poem, because that's really what it is, Dylan Thomas, the narrator, the boy, slips into bed, and he says, "I turn the gas down, I get into bed, I say some words to the close and holy darkness, and then I sleep." It's such a beautiful story. I would suggest to you, my friends, that you get yourself a copy of this, and then with your loved ones on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day, or maybe on Boxing Day, you sit around in a circle and you take turns reading this story aloud, one to another. The final story that I would like to share with you that I think is really worth considering during this wonderful holiday is J.R.R. Tolkien's Letters from Father Christmas. Sometimes they're issued as Father Christmas's letters. These are letters that J.R.R. Tolkien wrote to his children over a period of 20 years, starting in 1920, and the final letter was in 1943, at which point, of course, his children are grown. He pretended that these were from Father Christmas, and he went to elaborate means to make these letters both hilarious and funny, but beautiful to look at. He illustrates them, for example, with some of the most marvelous watercolor that you have ever seen. For my money, the primary character of the Father Christmas letters is the polar bear, the North Polar Bear, who's frequently referred to simply as PB in Father Christmas's letters to Tolkien's children. And the PB is always getting into all kinds of mischief. He's just a hilarious, buffoonish, but very, very lovable character. And in fact, when Father Christmas writes about his misadventures, the PB will often scrawl in the margin of Father Christmas's letters responses to what Father Christmas has said. Responses, by the way, that are always horribly misspelled. The letters feature other characters, elves and goblins and snow cubs, and as the letters progress into the Second World War, they tend to become a bit darker. It's clear that Tolkien is responding to the harshness of what is happening to the entire world in World War II. But they never do lose their sense of the magical joy of Christmas. Let me read you just one quick excerpt from Father Christmas's letters. This is from a 1937 letter. This is what Father Christmas writes the Tolkien kids. Polar Bear was being allowed to decorate a big tree in the garden, all by himself and on a ladder. Suddenly we heard terribly growly, squealy noises. We rushed out to find Polar Bear hanging in the tree himself. "You're not a decoration," said Father Christmas. "Anyway, I am a light," he shouted, and he was. We threw a bucket of water over him, which spoilt a lot of the decorations, but saved his fur. The silly old thing had rested the ladder against a branch instead of the trunk of the tree. Then he thought, I'll just light the candles to see if they're working, although he was told not to. So he climbed to the tip of the ladder with a taper. Just then the branch cracked, the ladder slipped on the snow, and Polar Bear fell into the tree and caught on some wire, and his fur got caught on fire. Luckily he was rather damp, or he might have fizzled. I wonder if roast polar bear is good to eat. At other times, PB accidentally releases all of the fireworks that were responsible for the next 2 years' worth of Northern Lights. There is a spectacular show, as you can see on the cover of the book, drawn by J.R.R. Tolkien himself. But for the next 2 years, there are no Northern Lights. The stories are delightful. They're not just written for kids, my friends. They're written for adults like you and I who relish the joy, the jollity, the laughter, the grace, the love of Christmas, all of which is summed up for Christians in the Incarnation, and all of which are expressed in these stories that I've shared with you. Have a wonderful, wonderful Christmas with everyone whom you love. God bless. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.